Will you marry me?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
I love you. That's my ex-wife.
Ex-husband took Mistress to dinner, accidentally saw ex-wife being proposed to by a millionaire. Esteemed viewers, welcome to Luxurious True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more captivating luxury true stories. Let's get into the story. Benjamin Johnson and Anita Benson looked like the ideal marriage. They lived in a luxury riverside apartment, attended elegant business dinners, and were known as the calm, successful couple, his authority, her quiet grace. Benjamin was a respected investment strategist, and Anita was introduced as the wife who kept his life stable. She smiled often but spoke carefully, always pausing before answering him. At home, Benjamin controlled nearly everything. He chose what she wore, where they went, and who they met. He never shouted. He corrected. If she laughed too loudly, he called it improper. If she gave an opinion, he explained why she was wrong. The tone sounded polite, which made it harder to argue. Over time Anita stopped expressing herself and simply agreed. She kept a small hidden notebook filled with building sketches and room designs, dreams from before marriage when she loved architecture. Benjamin called such interests impractical, so she practiced in secret during long afternoons alone. Their life looked perfect to others, but to Anita it felt like living inside a carefully arranged picture she was not allowed to change. One evening Benjamin hosted a private dinner for colleagues at an upscale restaurant overlooking the skyline. The conversation revolved around investments and future developments. Anita listened quietly, but when one guest mentioned urban housing design, she gently shared a small observation about how layout affects people's comfort. The table fell briefly silent. Benjamin smiled, but it was the thin smile she recognized. He lightly corrected her, saying design was more artistic than practical and that real decisions belonged to financial minds. The others laughed politely, and the topic moved on. Anita lowered her gaze and continued eating. Throughout the night Benjamin kept control of the conversation, occasionally referring to Anita in ways that sounded like compliments yet diminished her. He described her as someone who prefers simple things and joked that complex discussions bored her. Each remark drew mild amusement from the guests. Anita maintained her composed expression, but she stopped speaking entirely. She felt invisible while sitting directly beside him, present only as part of his image. On the way home, the car ride was quiet. City lights slid across the windows as Benjamin checked messages on his phone. He casually advised her not to interrupt business conversations again, explaining it could harm his professional impression. Anita nodded without arguing. Later that night, after he slept, she opened her hidden notebook and added several new sketches, pressing the pencil harder than usual, as if putting words onto paper she could not say aloud. In the following weeks Benjamin adjusted their routines without discussion. Shared accounts were replaced with allowances transferred to Anita at fixed times, and he explained it was better organization. Invitations from her old friends were declined on her behalf because they did not fit their circle. Phone calls grew shorter since he often reminded her long conversations were unproductive. Nothing sounded harsh on its own, yet together they slowly narrowed her world to the apartment walls and scheduled appearances beside him. Days became quiet and repetitive. Benjamin left early for meetings while Anita remained alone in the bright living room that felt increasingly unfamiliar. She began spending mornings by the window with her notebook, sketching building entrances, staircases, and rooms she imagined designing. Wanting to learn properly, she enrolled in an online design course using a shortened version of her name so it would not draw attention. Each lesson felt like reclaiming a small piece of herself she thought she had lost. In the evenings Benjamin returned with business updates and expectations for upcoming events. He rarely asked about her day, assuming it had been restful. Anita answered simply and kept her studies private, afraid he would dismiss them as pointless. Yet the secret work gave her quiet strength. For the first time in years, she felt she was building something that belonged only to her, even if it existed only on paper for now. At a corporate networking reception held in a glass-roof lounge, Benjamin met Sharon Clark. She approached with confident ease, already knowing his recent investment successes and praising his decision-making. Unlike others who tried to impress him, she focused entirely on admiring him. Benjamin found the attention refreshing and invited her to sit with his group. Sharon listened carefully, laughed at the right moments, and asked questions that made him speak longer than usual. Over the next days she began sending short messages, articles about markets, compliments about his presentations, and casual suggestions for coffee discussions. Benjamin accepted, convinced she understood ambition better than most people around him. Sharon presented herself as independent and insightful, someone who respected his authority without challenging it. He started extending meetings just to continue their conversations. At home, Anita noticed the change in his schedule and lighter mood after work. He spoke more about a smart new contact who appreciated his ideas. Anita nodded politely, though a quiet unease settled inside her. She did not question him, but that night her sketches became sharper, more detailed, as if her mind was searching for stability in lines and structures while something unseen in her life slowly shifted. Soon Sharon's name appeared regularly in Benjamin's conversations. At breakfast he mentioned her discipline at work, and during dinners he spoke about her refined taste in art and restaurants. The remarks sounded casual, but they slowly turned into comparisons. If Anita dressed simply, he noted Sharon preferred modern styles. If Anita stayed quiet, he said Sharon always had engaging opinions. Each statement carried a light tone yet left a clear meaning behind it. Anita responded calmly, though she felt herself shrinking in her own home. She began speaking even less, not wanting to create another opportunity for correction. When she once suggested a small decor change in the apartment, Benjamin dismissed it, saying Sharon had recently explained why minimalist spaces were superior. The comment lingered long after the conversation ended. Anita returned to her notebook that evening, sketching an apartment full of warmth and color, the opposite of the room around her. Benjamin, meanwhile, seemed energized by the attention he received from Sharon. He extended work hours and checked his phone more frequently, sometimes smiling at messages he did not share. To him it felt like meeting someone who truly appreciated him. To Anita, the apartment felt quieter than ever. She sensed a distance growing, though no direct argument had occurred, only a series of small comparisons that slowly replaced her place in his life. One afternoon Anita decided to bring Benjamin documents he had forgotten at home. His office building was busy but familiar to her, and the receptionist recognized her immediately. She expected to leave the folder and return quietly, yet Benjamin's assistant mentioned he was in a meeting upstairs. The door to his private office was slightly open. As Anita approached, she heard soft laughter, lighter than any tone she had heard from him at home. Inside, Benjamin stood close to Sharon near his desk. Their conversation was no longer professional. The distance between them made that clear. Sharon adjusted his tie while he held her hand in a comfortable familiarity. Anita froze at the doorway. Neither noticed her at first. When Benjamin finally turned, surprise lasted only a second before his expression hardened into irritation rather than guilt. He asked why she had come without notice, speaking as if she had interrupted important business. Sharon stepped back quietly, watching. Anita placed the folder on the table and said nothing. The silence stretched longer than an argument would have. Benjamin explained calmly that she misunderstood the situation and that appearances could be deceiving, yet his tone held no apology. Anita nodded once and left, walking out of the building with steady steps while her thoughts felt unsteady. Outside, the afternoon traffic moved normally, but her world had shifted into something unfamiliar and painfully clear. That evening Benjamin did not attempt to soften what had happened. Instead, he presented the situation as inevitable. He said their marriage had grown unbalanced and that he needed someone who understood his level of ambition. He spoke in measured sentences, already prepared. Papers were placed neatly on the dining table as if this had been decided long before Anita walked into his office that afternoon. He claimed it would be better for both of them. Anita listened without interrupting. She asked only one question, whether there had ever been a moment he doubted this decision. Benjamin answered that she had grown too dependent on him and that independence would teach her strength. He believed she would eventually see how much she needed him. Anita stepped into the street alone, unsure of what came next but certain of one thing: she would not return. Anita rented a small apartment above a quiet grocery store on a side street far from the river district. The rooms were narrow, the walls plain, and the windows faced another building instead of open water. At first the silence felt heavier than the space itself. She unpacked slowly, arranging only essentials: a bed, a table, a chair, and her notebook placed carefully near the light. The absence of luxury revealed how little she truly owned, yet it also removed expectations she had been trying to meet for years. Daily routines became practical rather than decorative. She learned to plan expenses, walked instead of taking taxis, and cooked simple meals. Without social obligations her days stretched long, but she filled them with study. Her online design lessons now had real purpose. She practiced measuring spaces in her apartment, experimenting with layout ideas, imagining how comfort could exist even in small rooms. Mistakes frustrated her at times, yet the progress felt genuine because it belonged only to her effort. Some evenings doubt appeared, usually when passing bright restaurants or seeing couples dressed for events she once attended. The memories no longer carried comfort, only distance. Instead of retreating, she returned to her table and sketched again. The lines grew steadier each week. For the first time, survival depended on her decisions alone. The uncertainty was frightening, but it also brought a quiet strength she had never been allowed to discover before. One rainy afternoon Anita stepped into a small neighborhood bookstore to avoid a sudden downpour. Inside, shelves had shifted after a delivery, and several books had slipped onto the floor. She instinctively began arranging them by size and theme, creating a clearer walking path without being asked. The elderly owner, Margaret Hale, watched with curiosity instead of protest. When Anita finished, Margaret thanked her and noticed the notebook she carried. Margaret asked about the sketches visible between the pages. Anita hesitated but explained she was studying interior design and practicing whenever possible. Rather than dismissing it, Margaret invited her to look around the shop and suggest improvements. Anita spent an hour carefully adjusting reading corners, moving a chair toward natural light, and reorganizing a display table to feel more welcoming. Customers who entered paused longer than usual, browsing instead of rushing. Impressed, Margaret offered her small paid tasks, nothing grand, just help rearranging seasonal displays and improving the shop's layout. For Anita it was the first time someone valued her ideas openly. She returned home that evening carrying a modest payment and a stronger sense of direction. The amount was small, but the confidence it brought felt larger than any comfort she had known in years. Margaret soon recommended Anita to a neighboring cafe owner who wanted the space to feel warmer without expensive renovations. Anita visited early in the morning before opening hours, studying how customers moved between the counter and windows. She suggested simple changes, rotating tables to face natural light, adding shelves for plants, and softening the harsh overhead lighting with warmer fixtures. The owner agreed cautiously, unsure small adjustments could matter. Within days the atmosphere changed. People lingered longer, choosing window seats and ordering additional drinks while working or reading. The owner noticed conversations lasted instead of rushing out the door. He paid Anita more than she expected and mentioned her work to nearby shopkeepers. It was the first time she earned money directly from her own skill rather than sharing someone else's success. That evening Anita walked home with steady steps, holding her payment envelope. She stopped briefly outside her building, looking up at the modest windows that now felt less temporary. Her notebook filled with new ideas inspired by real spaces instead of imagination alone. For the first time since leaving Benjamin's apartment, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile, realizing she was no longer simply starting over, she was moving forward. Across the city, Benjamin's life moved in the opposite direction. He attended more events than before, always with Sharon beside him. She blended effortlessly into his world, greeting executives confidently and praising his achievements in conversations that others could hear. Benjamin enjoyed the attention their pairing attracted. Where Anita had been quiet, Sharon was lively and openly admiring, making him feel admired rather than questioned. He began introducing her not as a colleague but as his partner. Photographs from dinners and conferences appeared across social circles, reinforcing the image of a man whose life had improved after divorce. When acquaintances politely asked about Anita, he dismissed the past as a mismatch he had corrected. Sharon encouraged this narrative, often reminding him he deserved someone who matched his ambition and lifestyle. Benjamin felt certain he had made the right decision. His schedule was full, his reputation intact, and Sharon's constant approval strengthened his confidence. Yet beneath the pride he rarely noticed how often she steered conversations toward his finances and upcoming investments. To him it sounded like interest. To her it was information carefully collected while she maintained the role of devoted companion. Anita's small projects began connecting to one another. The cafe owner recommended her to a boutique manager who wanted a calmer shopping atmosphere. Anita redesigned fitting room spacing and adjusted lighting angles so colors appeared more natural. Customers responded immediately, spending more time browsing instead of leaving quickly. The manager praised her work openly, and for the first time Anita's name circulated among local business owners rather than quietly between neighbors. Margaret helped her print simple business cards using the bookstore computer. Anita hesitated before accepting them, still unused to presenting herself confidently. She started introducing her work as practical comfort rather than decoration, explaining how layout changes behavior. People listened. Each completed project added new experience and steady income, allowing her to upgrade her tools and create a small workspace in her apartment corner. One afternoon she received an email requesting a consultation for a larger commercial office redesign. The company name was unfamiliar but established. Reading the message twice, she felt equal parts excitement and caution. It was the first opportunity beyond neighborhood businesses. Instead of fear, she prepared carefully, reviewing measurements and ideas late into the night. The uncertainty remained, yet it carried anticipation rather than doubt. The office building requesting the consultation stood in a quiet financial district, modern yet understated. Anita arrived early, carrying her folder of sketches and notes. She expected to meet a manager or assistant, but instead she was guided into a spacious conference room where a man reviewed documents alone. He introduced himself simply as Richard Carson. His tone was calm, and he listened without interrupting as she explained her approach to workspace comfort and productivity. Unlike most clients, he asked detailed questions, not about cost first, but about how people felt in different environments. Anita described movement flow, lighting psychology, and how small layout changes could reduce tension during long work hours. Richard considered each answer carefully rather than rushing decisions. The conversation felt less like a test and more like collaboration, which allowed her confidence to grow naturally. Before she left, Richard requested the full proposal and thanked her personally for her time. Later she learned from the receptionist that he owned the company and several others connected to it. The realization surprised her, yet what stayed with her most was his patience and respect during the meeting. For the first time in a professional setting, she felt heard rather than evaluated, and the experience lingered long after she stepped back onto the street. Richard invited Anita back to review her proposal in detail rather than approving it through assistants. They walked through the office floors together, discussing how employees interacted with the space. He observed quietly while she pointed out areas that caused congestion and corners that created unnecessary tension. Instead of dismissing her suggestions, he considered each carefully and asked how she would prioritize comfort without disrupting workflow. During a short break he brought coffee himself rather than calling staff, a small gesture that caught her off guard. The conversation drifted briefly beyond work, books, architecture, and how environments influence mood. He spoke calmly, never dominating the discussion. Anita realized she was answering naturally without rehearsing her words. The ease of the moment felt unfamiliar but welcome. Over the following weeks their meetings continued as the project began. Richard respected schedules and often waited until she finished explaining before responding. There were no comparisons, no corrections disguised as advice. The professional distance remained clear, yet his steady kindness made the work environment feel safe. Anita found herself looking forward to progress updates not only for the project, but also for the quiet conversations that accompanied them. Weeks later, after the office redesign neared completion, Richard invited Anita to a formal dinner to thank her for the project's success. The restaurant overlooked the city lights, elegant but calm. Anita accepted with hesitation, choosing a simple dress that felt comfortable rather than impressive. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Benjamin reserved a table at the same restaurant for Sharon, planning an evening to celebrate a new investment opportunity she had encouraged him to pursue. The dining hall was softly lit, conversations blending into quiet background sound. Anita and Richard spoke easily about the finished project and future possibilities. At another table across the room, Benjamin laughed while Sharon described ambitious returns from the platform she had recommended. As servers moved between tables, Benjamin casually glanced around and suddenly froze. He recognized Anita immediately, seated beside a man he did not know, her expression relaxed in a way he had never seen before. Moments later Richard stood and, with calm sincerity, expressed how much he admired her determination and honesty. He presented a ring, asking her to build a future with him. The room seemed to pause for Benjamin while Anita, surprised and emotional, quietly accepted. Applause rose from nearby tables. Benjamin remained motionless, unable to process the scene before him, while Sharon continued speaking, unaware that his attention had completely shifted across the room. Benjamin barely heard Sharon asking what was wrong. His attention remained fixed across the restaurant where Anita now sat, speaking softly with Richard while staff congratulated them. The image unsettled him more than anger could. He had imagined her struggling, perhaps regretting the divorce, not smiling with quiet confidence beside someone else. For the first time since their separation, certainty left him. Sharon followed his gaze and finally understood what held him still. Throughout the rest of the evening Benjamin answered Sharon absent-mindedly. Her discussion about the investment opportunity continued, but he only nodded while replaying the scene repeatedly in his mind, the calm expression, the acceptance, the applause. He convinced himself the man must be manipulating appearances, that Anita could not truly have moved forward so completely. The idea bothered him enough to research Richard Carson later that night. Learning Richard was a successful billionaire unsettled him further. Instead of dismissing the moment, he became preoccupied with it. He checked social circles for mentions of the engagement and quietly asked contacts about Richard's businesses. The curiosity shifted into fixation. What he had expected to remain behind him now stood ahead of him, and the certainty he once carried slowly turned into restless unease. Sensing his distraction, Sharon steered conversations toward opportunity. She presented an online investment platform she claimed was privately circulating among elite clients, promising unusually fast returns. Normally Benjamin would analyze carefully, but his thoughts remained divided after the restaurant incident. Sharon emphasized urgency, saying access was limited and delay meant losing advantage. Her confidence and constant reassurance softened his caution. She arranged calls with representatives who spoke convincingly about advanced trading systems and exclusive partnerships. Documents appeared professional, and initial small transfers showed quick profit, reinforcing trust. Benjamin increased his investment gradually, then significantly. Sharon encouraged him, praising his decisiveness and suggesting this success would overshadow any recent irritation in his personal life. Focused on proving stability and control, he committed a large portion of his capital. Each positive update calmed his lingering thoughts about Anita. He believed financial success would restore his sense of superiority. Sharon remained supportive and attentive during the process, reinforcing his confidence while carefully ensuring the funds continued moving into accounts she directed him toward. The change came quietly. One morning Benjamin opened the platform and found the dashboard frozen. He assumed maintenance, but hours passed with no update. Calls to the representatives went unanswered, and emails returned automated replies. A faint unease formed as he tried the secondary contact Sharon had provided. It rang endlessly. By evening the website itself no longer loaded. He contacted Sharon repeatedly, but her phone remained off. Her apartment door was locked, and the concierge mentioned she had checked out early that morning. The realization unfolded slowly. Documents, meetings, and early profits had been structured to build trust before the larger transfer. The funds were gone. Benjamin spent the night contacting banks and authorities, yet each conversation confirmed the same conclusion: recovery would be difficult. The following days brought public consequences. Scheduled payments stalled, partners demanded explanations, and accounts were frozen pending investigation. Without Sharon's presence the situation felt heavier. The confidence he once carried dissolved into strained calculations and unanswered calls. The certainty he had lived by, control through wealth, no longer held, replaced by a silence similar to the one he once ignored in another apartment. News of Benjamin's financial trouble spread quickly through his professional circle. Meetings were postponed, then cancelled entirely. Partners who once sought his advice now spoke cautiously, protecting their own positions. Offices that used to welcome him became formal and brief. Without steady capital his influence weakened, and the confidence he relied on could not restore contracts already withdrawn. The reputation he built through certainty now faced doubt he could not easily dismiss. He attempted to trace Sharon's movements, but discovered every detail she shared had been carefully limited. Addresses were temporary, references unverified, and introductions indirect. Authorities recorded the report, yet progress was slow. For the first time, Benjamin navigated a situation where authority and money could not guarantee control. The experience left him restless and unusually quiet, forced to confront consequences rather than predict them. Meanwhile, Anita's work expanded steadily. The office project led to larger redesigns, and Richard encouraged her to accept opportunities at her own pace. She continued building her business carefully, valuing stability over rapid growth. Invitations now arrived based on her reputation rather than association. The contrast existed without direct contact, her life moving forward through effort, his stalled through misplaced certainty. Months later the city felt different to both of them. Anita's design studio occupied a modest but bright workspace filled with drafts, and materials, and quiet activity. She supervised a small team and still visited Margaret's bookstore regularly, never forgetting where her confidence began. Richard remained steady beside her, not directing her future but supporting her choices. Their engagement developed calmly, built on conversation and shared respect rather than appearance. Benjamin, living in a smaller apartment, adjusted to routines he once ignored, handling daily tasks personally and planning expenses carefully. The noise of his former social life had faded, leaving long hours for reflection. He occasionally passed places he once frequented and noticed how little they mattered without certainty attached to them. The loss forced him to recognize the difference between control and understanding, though acceptance came slowly. One afternoon their paths briefly crossed outside a renovated cafe Anita had designed. The exchange was polite and brief, carrying no bitterness. Each continued walking in opposite directions. For Anita it marked closure. For Benjamin it marked recognition of a life no longer his to influence. Ahead of her waited work she loved and a future freely chosen. Ahead of him waited lessons he could no longer avoid. As this story comes to an end, remember that behind every luxury lies a truth few ever see. If this story moved you, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until the next unforgettable true story, stay inspired and stay curious.